Hola. How are you, Vincy Lou Who? How's it going? Trying to figure out. Back up later. Oh, oh. Mm. The two-legged kind or the four-legged kind? Or do I want to know? Listen to tonight. That's some Disney piano tonight. Oh, I'm so sorry. Are you going to be able to listen? Okay. Better your house than my house because I woke up on the bitchy side this morning. Let me tell you, I ain't been a nice person today. Today's one of the days that I figured out why God didn't let me have kids. Well, they don't wake up the baby. I don't know, but I'm a little confused. So Nina sent me this two different extracts for me to choose from that Casey Wells. I have the book, so I'm a little confused on why. And I could read both of these in about 30 minutes, I think. I don't know where everyone's at, but I'm getting ready to start reading because it's 8:05. I sore my ear. I hate it when I do that. All right, let's get started and maybe everybody else will show up. It's unusual. Not have the gang here. All right, chapter 1. This is Princely Submission by Casey Wells. Chapter 1, April. I don't know if that's a month or a name. So, if there was one place Prince Jordan would be guaranteed to get a blowjob and lose his virginity, it was the U.S. Now all he had to do was get there. He has to change his mind. Except Jordan knew how intransigent his father could be. Once he made a decision, he rarely budged. Once he made a decision, he rarely budged from his position. This is so unfair. 1 month in the USA. 1 whole month of sightseeing, receptions. So what if there would also be meetings guaranteed to bore Jordan to tears? They were happening in America. And Jordan would be stuck in Eloria, Jordan would be stuck in Eloria, thousands of miles away, in a land where everyone knew his face, and he couldn't walk down a street without someone recognizing him. If I went to the U.S. with them, it was a pleasant fantasy, one that usually involved escaping the royal clutches long enough to get a mouth on his dick or a dick in his mouth. He wasn't fussy, and God knew he'd been trying to bring about both events and more besides for long enough. How hard can it be to find someone who won't run straight to my father? He set up the mountain of pillows supporting him as he surveyed his room. It occupied a turret, affording a view of the Capitol, except it was more than his bedroom, his refuge from duty, his bolt hole when he needed time alone with his laptop. It served as a reminder of his failures. The mirror facing him provided one such reminder: his tattoo. That had been an epic fail. The low bookcases beneath his window held the books he'd studied, and gazing at them brought Dr. Sajak to mind. Jordan had believed he'd almost achieved his goal until the salt and pepper haired tutor had gone running to the king. Then he was gone, replaced by Benita Heichel, a formidable teacher in her 60s. The door to his closet stood ajar, and it was natural his thoughts would go to Rufus. He'd been a little young for Jordan's current taste. Rufus had been barely 5 years older than him, but the opportunity had been too perfect to be ignored. Rufus had been taken on as the 12-year-old prince's valet, a job he'd walked into the week after he'd finished his schooling. Jordan hadn't paid him any attention until reaching the age of 17, when Rufus's hands on him had achieved a much greater significance. So had that beautiful face and the soft-looking lips that Jordan yearned to crush against his own. He'd employed every artful wile he possessed to persuade Rufus to overcome his fears, give in to his desires, drop to his knees, and open his mouth. Hey, Miss Shirley. Hey, Ori. That had gotten him a new servant, Camille, who had to have been at least 100 years old, and Rufus had left the palace. To this day, Jordan had no idea whether Rufus had been scared of his father or his father had found out and had sent him packing. Not that it mattered. The outcome was the same, and if his father had known, he'd said nothing. Jordan's riding boots stood beside the closet door, blocking and gleaming, and his stomach clenched. 2 failures for the price of 1. Samson, the stable boy, hadn't succumbed to his charms either, and the head groom Augustine had stepped in at Simpson's request. Jordan had gained a new appreciation of Augustine's beard flecked with silver, his broad chest, his muscular arms, and a new fantasy had emerged, one that had come to an abrupt end when Jordan, flushed from his ride, had suggested Augustine, Augustine's hands would be better served on him than on the horse. After that episode, Augustine had taken on a girl from the city to train her as a stable hand. Sorry, guys. The only person she dealt with on a regular basis was Jordan, and Augustine was always nowhere near when Jordan went riding. Yet another door slammed shut, another avenue closed off. Such rumination was getting him nowhere. A month remained until his parents would leave for the U.S., so there was time for one last try. Time for a miracle. Jordan threw back the sheets and lurched out of bed with fresh determination. He would do everything in his power to assure himself a seat in the royal jet. That left but one route open to him: lie. Jordan waited until the last ministers had left the council chambers before entering. His father sat at the oval table, a cup of tea in his hand and a neat sheaf of papers in front of him. Despite his annoyance at being thwarted at every turn, Jordan admired his father. The people adored and respected the king. His laws were just and his benevolence was renowned. If only he wasn't so unflinching at times. Then he reconsidered. The one person subjected to that particular trait was himself. He glanced up at Jordan as Jordan approached. "Good morning, father." Jordan gestured to the chair facing him. "May I?" King Ludmir arched his brows. "Such civility at this hour. Please join me." He bit back a smile. "What have you done now?" Jordan feigned surprise. "Nothing." The king sipped his tea. "Which translates as, you've done something, but no one has discovered it yet." He leaned back in the wide chair, his elbows on his arms, the cup still in his hands. "Give it time. Your deeds always find their way out of the shadows and into the light. Didn't the episode with the tattoo teach you that?" He arched his eyebrows. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? It isn't as if you could hide it forever. Camille would have spotted it eventually." His eyes glittered. "But I didn't need Camille's help. Not when the whole kingdom now knows the prince has a tattoo. You choose your accomplices poorly. I'm sure they promised you complete secrecy. But it was how many hours after they finished it that they posted on the internet?" His brows knitted. "By royal appointment indeed." "Father, that was 3 years ago. I've matured." That earned him another chuckle. "When? Overnight?" He leveled a hard stare at Jordan. "Just because you haven't been caught in some misdemeanor or other doesn't mean you haven't attempted it." This was getting him nowhere. Jordan clasped his hands on the table, his back straight as he looked his father in the eye. "Father, I now I know I've been less than the ideal son these last few years." He took a deep breath. "I've been a jerk." The king frowned. "Is that a word you picked up from the internet? I'm certain your tutors didn't teach you such vocabulary." He cleared his throat. "Although the less said about one tutor in particular, the better." "Father, what I'm attempting to say is, I want to try to be a son you can be proud of. I'm not promising perfection, and I don't think you'd expect or believe that of me, but," Jordan stood, his chin held high, "the day will come when I must rule Eloria. I need to learn all I can in preparation for that day. How he kept a straight face, he would never know. The cup landed in its saucer with a clatter, and the king narrowed his eyes, his lips pursed. Can this be true? Jordan had known it wouldn't be an easy task, but he wasn't about to let the opportunity slip through his fingers. Eloria's Eloria's fortunes are changing. Let's see. Eloria's fortunes are changing, father, so it is right that I should change too. Maybe it's time I set in on council meetings to watch you, to learn from you. I know I haven't undertaken many royal engagements, but his father many try none. Jordan squared his shoulders. I meant engagements on my own. I've watched the military parades from the balcony with you and mother. I've attended the services in the chapel. I've Perhaps you shouldn't bring up that last item. The king's eyebrows shot up once more. I seem to recall you spending more time trying to catch the attention of one of the courtiers than listening to the sermon. Damn, Jordan had thought he'd been subtle. Then the king sighed. Maybe I'm being too harsh. You can't blame me for distrusting your motives. You haven't given me much cause to trust you these past 3 years. Jordan opened his mouth, but his father held up a hand. Hear me out. You've obviously given this issue a great deal of thought. I have, Jordan assured him, his heart pounding at his first sign of a thaw. You've told me often enough in recent months how important, how vital this trip is for Eloria's future. You'll be meeting with business owners and executives, all desperate to work with us. Surely I should be at those meetings too. They need to know who they will be dealing with once you step down from the throne. They need to know the links you forge now will continue to be strong. Please let this work. Let him hear me. He considered his approach all morning, aiming to say all the right things. Not that Jordan meant a word of it. The king smiled. So that's it. You want to come with us to the United States. I should have guessed your motivation. Jordan affected a pained expression. I'm hurt, father. You know everything I just said is true. I want to be in those meetings with you to present the face of the next ruler of Eloria. Is that wrong of me? King Ludomir said nothing. He met Jordan's gaze, and Jordan stared back at him, not blinking, hardly daring to breathe. At last the king nodded. I will discuss this with your mother. Maybe there is something in what you say. Jordan caught his breath. Father, he held up his hand again. I am not saying you can come with us. I merely say I will discuss the possibility. Thank you, Father. Jordan bowed his head and left the council chamber. His instincts told him nothing more would be gained by pursuing the issue. The temptation was huge to find his mother and loosen her up to the idea, but he sensed that would only confirm his father's suspicions. Let them talk about it. And in the meantime, Jordan was going to hide away in his room with his laptop. He had some research to do. If this came off, he needed to have plans in place. Dinner was over, and Elise had poured the coffee before withdrawing from the dining room, from the dinner room. Since that morning, Jordan had not brought up the topic of the visit. Some inner voice told him to abide his time, to not appear too eager. The door to the hallway closed, and his father glanced at his mother, who rose to her feet. I will leave you two to talk. She gazed at Jordan, her eyes warm. It's good to see you growing up at last. Then she gestured to the remaining servants to leave the room. She walked away from the table and out of the door, and a servant closed it behind her. That was all it took to quicken Jordan's heartbeat. He used every ounce of strength he possessed to remain silent, waiting on his father. At last the king coughed. Your mother and I have discussed the visit, and we've decided you're right. You should be there. There is a God, specifically a God who looked after horny virgins in need of release. Jordan gave a brief bow of his head. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Father. I won't let you down. At least I'll make sure you never find out what I get up to. I'm sure you won't. The king's eyes held a glint that unnerved him a little. Maybe tomorrow I can look at the itineraries planned for the visit to acclimatize myself with the. Not so fast. Jordan froze, his heart thumping. But you said. I know what I said, and I meant it. You shall accompany us. But the king regarded him with an unwavering stare. There is one proviso. Jordan should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Yes, you will have a bodyguard assigned to you at all times. He smiled. Of course, father, I would expect nothing less. We're missing a bitch here. Where's she at? What's wrong there? Jordan could wrap any of the security team around his little finger. How else had he managed to get out of the palace to get the damn tattoo in the first place? May I choose who it is to be? That will not be possible, I'm afraid. It didn't matter. Jordan was confident he'd get out with any of them. Then you've already chosen. Not exactly. I've approached an agency in the US. One of whose operatives come highly recommended. I hope to interview him soon. If he's available, you'll get to meet him then. He and others from the agency will form our security team. There was a heavy feeling in Jordan's stomach. You're hiring strangers to protect us. Why not our own people? Not that he gave a damn, but about the rest of the team. An unknown bodyguard was also an unknown quantity. Think about it. Our people know Eloria. They are not familiar with New York or Los Angeles. This agency will provide us with operatives who know the terrain. Then why do I need my own bodyguard? As if he didn't know. Oh, I wasn't talking about you bitches. I was talking about the other bitch. Actually, there's two bitches, but one of them's probably at the gym or kung fu with the kids or whatever, or working. Oh. The king's eyes grew flinty. You don't have to agree to my condition, but if you don't, you will remain here. Jordan sagged into his chair. I see. And as to the itineraries, I will expect you to attend meetings as you suggested. Jordan widened his eyes. What about sightseeing? Surely I'll get some time to. I did not say you would attend all the meetings, but you must attend some. His father tilted his head to one side. Jordan, you have the opportunity to live your own life so far without worrying about future responsibilities. But you're right. It's time to face up to those responsibilities. So, if you can rein yourself in for a few hours each morning, the afternoons will be yours to do your sightseeing. Jordan sighed. With my babysitter as a permanent shadow.
The king nodded. At least you'll get to meet him before we arrive in New York next month. He got up from the table. Then you agree to my condition? Yes, father. It wasn't as if he had any choice to the matter. Excellent. I'll have Pior add you to the itinerary and the accommodation. He walked around the table to where Jordan sat and laid his hand on Jordan's shoulder. I am proud of you for the maturity you've shown in this matter. I know you won't let me down. Then he left the room. Jordan stared at the snow white tablecloth, his head spinning. I do not need a babysitter. At least the interview would give him the measure of his bodyguard. If he was anything like the men already protecting the royal family, Jordan would have no trouble at all making his escape. If he's like them. Chapter 2. Stuart Whitmore got out of the shower and grabbed a towel from the rail. After the accommodation he'd endured during the past week, it was a relief to be in familiar surroundings, even if his apartment was no more than a flop house for storing his possessions and clothes. He rubbed his hair dry as he walked naked into the living room. The blinds were open, but he didn't give a shit. If any of his neighbors got off on seeing him in the nude, who was he to spoil their fun? That is exactly my thoughts on the matter. Damn. A brandy before bed sounded perfect, and he poured himself a generous measure. He stretched out on the couch, the glass within reach, and folded his hands behind his head. Oh, yes, you do need a babysitter. I'm assigning Miss Shirley as your babysitter. He stretched out on the couch, the glass within reach, and folded his hands behind his head. I'm getting tired of all this. His assignments were varied. There was the rush of adrenaline at times, and there was always the prospect of travel. But at 40, after 10 years in the same line of work, his priorities had changed. I want a different kind of life. He craned his neck to take a good look at his surroundings. Talk about minimalist. There were no photos to be seen. Photos of whom? I've got no one. That was his choice, of course. He'd gotten rid of all evidence of Danny once the fucker had decided he wasn't gay after all, and had gone off to marry some woman he had met on a dating app. He and Danny have fought and fucked all over the Middle East for 7 years, keeping their relationship a secret. The only guy I ever loved, and he took my heart and stomped all over it. Never again. Stuart's heart was now locked up good and tight, and no one was getting in. It hadn't been a deliberate choice to be celibate, but the bullshit that came with one night stands had sent him in that direction. He had no time or inclination for any of that crap. He could count on one hand how many times he'd gotten laid in the last 8 years. Back to back assignments, and a sex life just didn't work. Not that there hadn't been offers from some of his clients, the most tempting of which had been from the Russian count who'd invited Stuart into his bed on more than one night during that long, bitterly cold week in Moscow. One glimpse of the contents of the count's closet had promised a lot of fun, but Stuart couldn't risk word getting back to Matt, so he declined with extreme reluctance. Life is simpler without complications. And his boss finding out Stuart had tied a client to the bed, that was a complication Stuart could do without. Besides, not one of the guys he'd watched on his phone or his laptop was ever going to make demands on him. They did their thing and he got off. End of story. And so what if there was leather and all of its trappings gathering dust in his closet? That was yet another avenue closed to him because of the job. Christ, I really am getting tired of all this. Maybe the fact he'd stuck it out for this long was testament to his internal fortitude, or something like it. His phone burst into life with the tone that meant a Skype call. He glanced at the screen and laughed. For God's sake, Matt, I only got back an hour ago. He clicked on accept and Matt's face filled the screen. Stuart didn't wait for him to speak. You'll receive my report first thing tomorrow, Matt. A few minutes to breathe would be nice. Matt had the good grace to look apologetic. Then he frowned. Are you naked? Do you know what time it is? Too late for Matt to be calling, for one thing. Sorry, but I wanted to get you before you crashed. You did a great job. I've already called I've already had calls from the clients singing your praises. This was a tough one. Stuart was too bone tired for this shit. I'm waiting. For what? Whatever it is you're about to spring on me, because since when do you call me the minute an assignment finishes? Look, I know, I know you're owed some leave. Oh, crap. You bet your ass I am. As of now, I have one whole week of doing absolutely nothing. Yeah, I know, but something's turned up. Stuart rolled his eyes. Something is always turning up. This is different. How would you like a high class assignment? No heavy stuff, a real easy ride. He snorted. No such thing in our game. But okay, I'll buy it. What's the job? He could always say no, right? Bodyguard to an Eastern European prince. We're providing the security detail for a royal visit over here in May, but the king wants someone specifically assigned to his son. Stuart frowned. Why me? Doesn't Kennedy normally deal with royalty? Sure, but look, they want someone who isn't easily manipulated. Their words. I said you had a rep for not pulling punches or being politically correct. They almost bit my hand off, they were that eager. Who is they? I spoke with this guy. Matt glanced at something out of view of the webcam. It's pronounced it's pronounced Peter, but it looks weird. Anyway, he's PA to the king. Does the king know my rep too? Stuart grinned. Matt nodded. Apparently he's heard of you. Remember that job in Saudi last year? He groaned. Don't remind me. That guy's advisors fought me at every turn. He did too, stubborn fucker. Yeah, but you stood your ground. You stuck to your guns. And because you did, there's an Arab ruler sitting in his palace right now who'd be in the ground if it weren't for you. That's why I think you're the right man for this job. I thought that even before they asked for you. So does the king. If you can stand up to the ruler of an Arab nation, you can stand up to a prince of Eloria if you need to. Eloria? Where the fuck is Eloria? Sounds like someplace you just made up. Pull up a map of Europe, then find the Ukraine, Romania, and Moldova. That where they all meet, there's this little country. That's Eloria. Stuart smelled around. And why does of a tiny country need protection? Or do they think the U.S. is full of guys with assault rifles at every corner? Matt leaned toward the camera. Do you know what rhodium is? Some kind of metal? The name sounded vaguely familiar. Matt nodded. A very rare metal. It's used in catalytic converters, and since every country, well, most countries in the world are committing to reducing toxic emissions and having to come up with more stringent ways of tackling air pollution, catalytic converters are big news. Stuart yawned. Is there a point to this lecture? All you need to know is there's a supply deficit of rhodium and the demand for it has risen. So has the price. Right now, rhodium is 17 times costlier than gold and about 25 times more than platinum. The Washington Post reported burglars in the U.S. have begun sawing off cars' exhaust pipes in search of rhodium in vehicles after prices hit a record high. It's got other uses too. This still sounds like a lecture. Okay. You find rhodium when you mine for platinum and palladium. South Africa accounts for about 80 to 90% of the total of the world's rhodium. However, In recent years, Eloria geologists discovered platinum and started mining it. Stuart finally saw the light, and now they're mining rhodium. Matt nodded again. Nowhere near as much as South Africa or Russia, but it's caught the attention of the car companies here in the US. And all the companies want to make a deal with Eloria. So that's why they're coming here on a visit. Yeah, they're going to New York City and then LA. The king wants to meet with all the car company bigwigs before he signs any contracts. Why didn't he go to Detroit? Duh. Uh, Matt shrugged. Plus, he gets to see a bit of the good old US of A. And the prince, what about him? How old is he? Please, don't tell me I'm expected to babysit some kid. Relax. He's 20. Okay, that was better. What's he like? Well, if you're interested, you'll see for yourself next week. The king wants to meet you first before he decides. Where? They'll provide you with a return air ticket to Bucharest, where the royal jet will take you to the airstrip in Eloria and then by car to the palace. They ask that you plan on spending a couple of days there. Stuart was still trying to figure out the catch. What kind of place is Eloria? Given its location, it sounded like it could be back of beyond. I googled it. Beautiful place, kind of medieval looking palace, narrow cobbled streets, painted houses, the sort of place you see on postcards. You'll have some time to sightsee, I'm sure. He paused. So, what do I tell them? Are you interested? If I go there and I'm not happy about the job, can I say so? Sure, you can. Matt squinted at him. But why would you want to turn down a dream job? It might be your dream job, your idea of a dream job. That doesn't mean it's mine. Is there any threat or danger? I don't think it's that kind of job. The PA I spoke to was a little vague on why the prince needs a bodyguard. The remark about wanting someone who was not easily manipulated had piqued Stuart's interest. Maybe I'll find that out when I go see him. Matt beamed. I'll email the palace right away and tell them you'll come. Hey, wait a second. How long is the assignment? Matt's gaze was way too innocent. Didn't I mention that part? They'll be here for a month. Stuart gaped. A whole month? Usually his jobs were anything from a couple of days to 2 weeks at the most. Don't you just love it when I forget to turn the voice off and read the in between? Yeah, yeah, but think about it. You'll sleep in swanky hotels, fly from place to place in a royal jet. Not seeing any downside of all this, I gotta say. Stuart glared at him. Then you'd better hope this job is as good as you're making it out to be. Because if it isn't, one less thing, if you do accept the job, you'll need a tux. What the fuck for? Because we're talking royal receptions, balls. These guys are going to be wined and dined on two coasts, I'm telling you, and you'll need to fit in. He grinned. Get some sleep. I'll be in touch. He disconnected the call. Stuart sat up and reached for the brandy. He knocked it back, coughing a little as it hit his throat. A month. The prince had better not be an asshole. Then he smiled to himself. He had ways of dealing with assholes, prince or not. 5 days later, Stuart emerged from the sky bridge to find an airport official holding up a card with his name on it. I'm Stuart Whitmore, he said as he walked over to him, clutching his bag. The man smiled. If you will follow me, please. The lead steward passed the desk and along the concourse. Your passport and bag will be checked before you board the jet, just which leaves from the private terminal. When they reached security, the man waved a badge and the armed guard stood aside to let them pass through. Stuart found himself outside in the brisk morning air, walking toward a jeep. Have you been to Bucharest before? Is it Bucharest? Am I saying that right?
What it looks like. How come it sounds funny when I say it? That's what it looks like. Am I saying it right? Have you been to Bucharest before? The official inquired as he drove them away from the main terminal. No, and I get the feeling I've seen all I'm going to see. He hated overnight flights. He could never sleep, which meant he generally arrived. Well, Vincy, you're the one that is like globally educated around here. You're the one that's supposed to see. I'm thinking Budapest is what I'm thinking, but I don't know if Budapest and Bucharest sound similar or not. No, and I get the feeling I'm seeing all I'm going to see. He hated overnight flights. He could never sleep, which meant he generally arrived at his destination cranky and tired. Do you know how long the flight is to Eloria? Maybe he was exhausted enough to grab some shut eye on the plane. It takes an hour. The jeep pulled up outside a small building, and the official led him inside. Another official and an armed guard were waiting for him. They checked his passport. They passed his bag through a scanner. All done, the official said with a smile. If you'll follow me, I'll take you to the plane. Stuart walked out of the door at the rear. A sleek jet stood on the tarmac, its engines making a dull roar. He nodded appreciatively. Gulfstream G550. Nice. The official turned to look at him. You know of such things? I've flown in a couple. They headed for the steps that led up to the door where a well-dressed young woman awaited them. Your passenger, the official told her. He extended a hand and Stuart shook it. I wish you a safe trip, Mr. Whitmore. I'll see you on your return. Then he descended the steps and went back to the building. I'm Joanna, and I'll be taking care of you during the flight. She stood to one side to let him step into the plane, then gestured to the right. Take a seat, please. The interior was luxurious, with cream leather seats and couches, enough for maybe 14 people, thick carpet covering the floor, and everywhere there was the gleam of varnished wood inlaid with a delicate design executed in thin strips of gold. Stuart sat in the nearest seat and strapped himself in. Joanna waited until he was done before handing him a card. Here is the safety information for this plane. The exits are clearly marked, and I'll be sitting at the rear. Should you require anything, simply press the button. She pointed to a black disc on the ledge below the window. Can I get you something to drink? Don't suppose you got any coffee brewing back there? Stuart thought he caught a whiff as he got on the plane, but he could have imagined it. She smiled. I certainly do. I'll bring some to you. We'll be taxiing as soon as clearance is given. She walked away. Stuart sat back to enjoy the ride. The coffee was good, and the sweet pastry that arrived with it was even better. It felt as if they were hardly in the air before Joanna announced that they were getting ready to land. A glance through the window revealed a carpet of fields with tiny towns clustered here and there. He spotted the airstrip as the plane banked a single runway with a small terminal. The landing was smooth, and Joanna strode briskly to the door to open it. She pushed out the steps and gave Stuart a sunny smile. Welcome to Eloria, Mr. Whitmore. Stuart descended. Where's Jackie at when I need her? She's the other worldly person around here. She just tell me it just depends on your pronunciation. Different people pronounce it different ways. Stuart descended into bright sunshine. Several feet away from the end of the airstrip was a gleaming black car, next to which stood a man of average height with a neat goatee and a mustache. He smiled, and Stuart approached. Welcome to Eloria, Mr. Whitmore. I'm going to call him Peter because it's Piotr. I don't know. I'm Peter, PA to His Majesty King Ludmir. They shook hands. The driver will take your bag. Please get in. The driver opened the rear door, and after handing over his luggage, Stuart climbed in. Peter joining him on the other side. As they pulled away from the terminal, Peter said, I'm not sure if you've had any dealings with royal clients before. I'm here to brief you on protocol. I assume I address the king as your majesty and the prince as your highness? Peter nodded, his lips twitched. You're not what I imagined.
Stuart resisted the urge to chuckle. So I'm guessing you've not had any dealings with Americans. Were you expecting someone who chews gum, talks loudly, and wears cowboy boots? Peter flushed. Forgive me. You are quite correct. I had indeed expected somebody far more stereotypical. He nodded toward the window. Your first views of Eloria. Lord, it's a lot of back and forth. Matt had nailed it. Eloria was beautiful. As they drove through the narrow streets, Stuart got glimpses that built up a picture in his mind. Warm, sand-colored stone glowed in the sunlight, and it was everywhere. In the walls, the graceful arches, even the paving that covered the main square, where it seemed almost polished by the wear of feet. A clock tower stood at one end, its red roof rising to aspire. What Stuart loved most of all was how green the place was. Trees lined the wider roads, growing denser as they neared the steep hill to the north of the city. There were flowers, bright splashes of fuchsia and lilac that adorned the houses, blossoming above doorways and below windows. The half-timber houses were colorful too, some painted in shades of blue, pink, white, and terracotta, their dark timbers standing out against the paler walls. The wide river snaked through the city, spanned by several bridges constructed in brick or stone, and along its banks the houses benefited from balconies overlooking its glistening, calm surface. That's the place up there, Peter said, pointing. Stuart peered through the window. It seemed more like an imposing fortress than a palace. Its walls and turrets had been built from warm red stone, and ramparts surrounded it. The palace sat on top of the hill, emerging from a thick mound of lush trees, with yet more foliage showing above the battlements. The car wound through the narrow streets, climbing higher until at last they were in a courtyard. The driver popped the trunk and then got out to retrieve Stuart's bag. This way, Peter led him up the short flight of steps to the impressive main door set in an archway of sculpted stone. But as they stepped through them, Stuart came to a halt. Instead of a dark, gloomy interior, what greeted him was a surprisingly light space. White marble covered the floors and walls, and the multiple windows let in the sunlight. And this is not what I expected, he murmured. He followed Peter through the hallway with its vaulted ceiling to a staircase flanked by stone balustrades. At the top were two large doors, and Peter opened them. Stuart entered what had to be a royal audience chamber. At one end, the wall was draped in purple satin, in front of which was a dais with two thrones. The black and white tiled floor was empty, but for a single chair facing the thrones. Feels more like an interrogation than an interview, Stuart muttered. Well, we can't have that. Well, we can't have that. The words, although softly spoken, made him jump, and Stuart jerked his head. Beside him stood a tall man in his early 50s, Stuart estimated, in a small gray suit, his blue eyes sparkling. Stuart wasn't the only one who jumped. Before he could utter a word, Peter bowed his head, then addressed Stuart. May I introduce His Majesty King Ludmir of Eloria? Shit. Okay, I'll go ahead and read chapter 3 too. We'll get started. Stuart gave a, and I'll read for a little bit. I don't know where I'll stop at. Stuart gave a polite bow. Your Majesty, I hope I caused no offense. Way to go to make great first impression. No, you didn't. In fact, your appraisal was quite accurate. I think this interview would be best conducted in less formal surroundings. He glanced at Peter, his eyes twinkling. Perhaps I need to invest in new leather shoes that squeak, so that you have some warning of my approach. Thank you, Peter. That will be all. I will take care of Mr. Whitmore from now on. Peter gave another bow of his head, then withdrew from the audience chamber. King Ludmir chuckled. I have a habit of sneaking up on him. One day I will give him a heart attack. He gestured to the rear of the chamber where two doors flanked the dais. Let us go to my private chamber. His lips twitched. It's far less imposing. Kind of like a guy with a sense of humor. The king led him to the door on the right. He pushed it open, and Stuart entered a much smaller room. A computer sat on the desk, and to the right, under the window, where were two comfortable-looking armchairs. He gestured to one of them. Please sit. Then he pressed a button on the desk. A moment later, a young woman appeared and bowed to him. Your Majesty? Elise, could we have some coffee, please? The king turned to Stuart. If that is agreeable. Stuart smiled. If you knew how much I need some caffeine right now, Your Majesty, you wouldn't ask. King Ludmir laughed. Another caffeine addict. I think we shall get along. Elise disappeared, and they sat in the two chairs. When we've spoken, and after you've met my son, I'll have you shown to your room. I thought you might prefer to stay in the palace. Thank you, Your Majesty. I'd assumed I'd be in a hotel in the city. Stuart has stayed in more than a few swanky places in his time, but never in so grand a palace. King Ludimir frowned. Certainly not. You're my guest. He leaned back in his chair. I trust your journey was satisfactory. The last part certainly was. Just don't ask about the flight to Bucharest. Not that there was anything wrong with it. It's just I find flying a tedious affair, the king commented. That is why I go everywhere in the jet. If I have to travel by plane, I insist on being comfortable while I do so. Elise returned, carrying a tray on which sat a coffee pot, two fat cups, a jug of cream, a bowl of sugar, and a plate of cookies. She deposited the tray on the small table between the chairs, gave another bow, and left them. Stuart glanced at the cookies. Are those for me? I think this is my cook's ideal. I've never seen cookies in this palace. He indicated the plate. Please help yourself. And once you've seen my son and your room, lunch will be served. After that, if you feel the need to take a nap, I will completely understand. You've traveled a great distance to be here. Now that you mention it, my arms are a little tired. Stuart quipped. He laughed. A sense of humor is a very likable trait, Mr. Whitmore, and one that bodes well for our discussion. Stuart gave him a thoughtful gaze. Are you interviewing all your security detail, Your Majesty? King Ludimir shook his head. No, just you. Stuart's interest was definitely piqued. To Stuart's surprise, the king poured him a cup of coffee. I asked for you because I did a little research and concluded that you are exactly what I'm looking for. As I require you for a specific purpose, I will be honest with you. Okay, the cookies could wait. If you are to agree to be my son's bodyguard, it is only fair that I give you an accurate portrait of him. Prince Jordan is our only child. In Stuart's book, that was an euphemism for spoiled. Hardly a child if he's 20, Your Majesty. Quite. But King Ludimore hesitated. I have afforded him too much latitude in recent years, and the constant consequences of his actions have not been severe enough. Stuart sipped his coffee. So what you're saying is he's gotten away with murder, figuratively speaking, of course. The king's eyes gleamed. Exactly. Perhaps in hindsight, we ought not to have chosen such a rigid path for him. When Stuart gave him a quizzical glance, he continued. It was decided that he should not have access to the internet until he was 16. Really? Then Stuart remembered his manners. I'm sure you had your reasons. The Queen felt it would distract him from his studies. Perhaps in retrospect, that was wrong. He's had a sheltered childhood. Maybe it's a little wonder he became rebellious. Stuart was beginning to see why Matt had thought he'd be a good fit for the assignment. Let me guess. The rebellion started once he got past 16. When the king blinked, Stuart nodded. It's like any kid who's been deprived of candy snacks when they're finally let loose in a candy store. He mimed an explosion. I fear you are correct. King Littlemore sipped his coffee. Eventually, the crown will pass to Jordan. He's told him, he's told me that he needs to be prepared for such an eventuality, and perhaps this trip will mold him a little better. And the man who will be the future king will emerge. He said that. Stuart gave an eternal snort. That kid sure knows how to play his own man. King Littlemere smiled. I am not a fool, Mr. Whitmore. I think Jordan said exactly what I wanted to hear. As they say in your country, Jordan talks the talk, but so far he has yet to walk the walk. Stuart grinned. No, sir, you are not a fool. The king stippled his fingers. I chose you because of your reputation as a man not easily manipulated. That might have been mentioned in conversation. Stuart cocked his head to one side. That implies you think he will try to manipulate me. King Ludimir smirked. I am certain of it. That is why I want someone who will be firm. I couldn't trust this job to any of my team. It had to be someone from outside of Valoria. I'm not connected in any way to your team. Is that it? The king nodded. Stuart arched his eyebrows. Just how firm do you want me to be? I leave that up to you. He will be in your hands, and I will not interfere. You're giving me free rein. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. I will be involved in negotiations to secure contracts. That is, after all, the focus of my visit. I do not want to be forever wondering if my son is behaving as he should. I would be trusting you to ensure he toes the line and does not bring shame upon Eloria. He met Stuart's gaze. I am under no illusions. This is no easy talk that I set. He will push your buttons, as they say, once he finds them, and he will find them. Stuart smiled. He can try. I don't like his chances. King Ludomir's eyes sparkled. I think I chose well. He cleared his throat. Perhaps it is time you two should meet. I believe he is in the library. He spends a lot of time in there or in his room. His brow furrowed. He has too little he has too little to occupy him, but that will change. The king led Stuart out of the private chamber, through the hallways that twisted and turned, up staircases and around corners, until finally they reached a far corner of the palace. He paused at the door. One last word before we enter. I will be present when you speak with him, but please, pretend I am not, and deal with him according to your instincts. Stuart nodded. You want him to see where the rubber meets the road? Okay. King Ludimir opened the door and strode into the room, Stuart behind him. The library wasn't huge, but there were shelves on every wall and a few wide leather armchairs here and there that appeared perfect for curling up with a good book. Curled up in one was the prince, his head in one hand, a book in the other. He raised his chin and looked Stuart up and down, appraising him. There was intelligence in that haughty gaze, and something else. His blue eyes widened a fraction, and there was a slight catch in his breathing. But he soon collected himself. He marked his place in the book, then set it down before rising to his feet. Jordan was taller than his father, but only slightly shorter than Stuart, with brown hair, short at the sides and longer on top and swept back. There was the faintest shadow of a mustache marring his creamy complexion. His mouth turned down at the corners. What do you look like when you smile, Your Highness? Do you smile? Stuart pushed the thought aside and gave a polite bow. Your Highness, let me introduce myself. My name is Stuart Whitmore. Behind him, he heard the scrape of a chair legs on the floor and knew the king had sat. Stuart gestured to the prince's chair. Please sit down. For a moment, it felt as though Jordan was going to ignore him, but at last he sat heavily, his arms folded. Stuart grabbed the nearest empty chair and pulled it toward the prince. He sat, leaning forward, his hands clasped, waiting for Jordan to make a move. Where are you from? The prince's voice carried in the stillness of the library, and there was a sharp edge to it. Upstate New York, Your Highness. And how long have you been a bodyguard? 10 years. Jordan's eyebrows arched, and Stuart added with a smile, Your Highness. I get it. You're a brat, an entitled brat. When Jordan lapsed into silence, Stuart took control. Are you looking forward to the trip? Well, that depends. That haughty look was still in evidence. If you're to be my bodyguard, I'll expect you to do as I say. Stuart relaxed into the chair. Funny. That wasn't the impression I got of how this will go. The prince blinked. Really? What do you think your duties will entail? Stuart locked gazes with me. I I don't think I'll be there to do your bidding. It's more of a case of making sure you don't get yourself in trouble. Apparently, you're good at that. Jordan's eyes widened. You can't talk to me like that. I am a prince. Stuart nodded slowly. Yes, you are. When Jordan gave a smug smile, he continued, But you're not my prince. And if you don't like the way I talk to you, take it up with your father. He's sitting right there, and he doesn't seem to have a problem with the way I'm speaking to you. And another thing, when you're in my country, you would do as I say when it comes to keeping you safe. The prince glanced in his father's direction, then back to Stuart. And if I choose not to do as you say, time to teach the brat how the hand lies. Then, like any child who misbehaves, you will find yourself over my knee, Your Highness. He glanced toward the king and had to fight hard not to react. King Ludimir was clearly trying not to laugh. His face was flushed, his lips pressed together. Jordan gasped. You wouldn't dare try me. I can give you a taste right now of what's coming your way if you cross me. Stuart gave him a hard stare. Understand me, Your Highness. My job is to keep you from harm, whether that's something you walk into inadvertently or deliberately. Bada boom, bada bang. I'm done, ladies. I think that's a good place to keep it hanging. Keep it hanging. Alrighty. You guys have a wonderful weekend. I plan on dying this weekend, so you can send flowers if you like. Just make sure there's zinnias and sunflowers and daisies. And if they're not, then just donate books to a library. That works for me. Donate books to a library, especially erotica books, because not many libraries have erotica books. They're not the good ones anyway. So go get indie author books and donate them to a library. Okay. All right, everybody. So have a good weekend. And I'm going to go pass out now because I'm tired and I still got one more day of work and I don't want to do it. So I love you, girls. Thank you, Miss Casey, once you watch this. I appreciate it. Or Mr. Casey. I don't know if you're a Miss or a Mister. My apologies. I just rightly don't know. But thank you for letting me read this book. I appreciate it. And it sounds yummy. So, because it's 9:04, bitch. You can knee all you want, but you ain't getting no more from me. Love you, girls. Have a good night and happy reading.